Rock Salad TV. 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 Rock Salad TV.
So, ironically, we're in Vegas, and the first time you actually met and played with Ringo was in the late 70s. Tell me that story, and I understand there's a really interesting, fun story behind it.
It was Labor Day weekend, and the Jerry Lewis Telethon was on, and Jerry was convinced that he wasn't attracting a young enough audience, so he devised this thing called Jerry's Dance Party, and we put together a band to essentially entertain what turned out to be no dancers. No, about 200 people showed up in the UNLV, big hall in UNLV. But Ringo was in the band, Bill Wyman was in the band, I think Dave Mason showed up. Utopia was part of the band as well. And we just worked out a couple of quick songs. I don't think we played much longer than, I'm sure we didn't play even an hour. You know, we had a pretty good time until Jerry decided that he was going to send Doug Kershaw on a limousine full of showgirls over, you know, to I don't know what, you know. So suddenly I'm on the drums next to Ringo, and Doug Kershaw is playing some Cajun classic, but he won't stop playing it. He just keeps going back to the top again and playing it and playing it. We're getting like, we're eye rolling at each other, and so we start to bring the tempo up a little bit at a time, you know, and then it just starts getting faster and faster and faster until the bow is flaming and horsehair is flying everywhere. And yeah, it was at that moment I realized, wow, I'm playing with Ringo. It was kind of cool. But I didn't see Ringo again till 1993 after that.
You've been back more than anybody.
Probably. I think Ringo asked me to be on the very first All-Star band, but I was already committed to something else, so couldn't do it. So I got in like 2 bands later. And then again, a couple of years after that, when Jack Bruce and Gary Booker and Simon Kirke were in the band. And then add these 6 years to that.
You know, when the Beatles first came out, at what point did they instill in you a sense that I can do this, I can write songs, I can tap into this is exciting?
Well, it didn't occur to me to write the songs at first. As much as I enjoyed the material, I was more obsessed with the guitar than anything and would learn all the George Harrison solos and stuff. But a lot of people don't remember that the model previous to that was a front man and a backup band. And so you only ever knew the front man's name, and it was usually some handsome guy who could or could not sing. And you never knew the names of the guys behind him. And the Beatles was the first time you knew everybody's name, you know, and everyone, and you know, I had this sort of false sense of democracy, like everybody had, you know, a particular role to play, and it was a new formula, and all you had to do was find a couple other guys in your neighborhood, and you could put a band together. You no longer had to be Mr. Handsome. You know, you could find a role to play, and yet you would still get recognition for it.
Was there a period in the Beatles tenure that really connected with you? I've always heard you love the song "Tell Me Why" from Hard Day's Night, for instance, but was it the earlier period that you really loved the most?
Well, I did enjoy the earlier period. I was younger as well, you know, so it's all new, and it's and you can't wait to see what's coming next and things like that. But as time went on, I appreciated the band more for their ability and willingness to explore new things and incorporate new influences and to experiment in the studio. And so that was, I think, more my takeaway than anything. When I started writing songs, I was writing songs for guitar players, you know, and things like that. I was imitating Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that, you know. And it wasn't until I guess I got out of the Nas when I stopped being principally a guitar player that I started to write songs that were a little bit more well-rounded, I guess. And my influences are somewhat similar to the Beatles. Sometimes you think you're being influenced by someone, but then you're not fully aware of how influenced they are by somebody before that. So, you know, the R&B influences that they had kind of followed through with me, but a lot of that was because I grew up in Philadelphia. That was our native music there.
And a lot of the Broadway stuff and things like that.
Broadway stuff, that was the music kind of that I grew up with because my dad wouldn't allow rock and roll to be played in the house. But
what was the first music where, you know, you heard this music at home, but what was the first music where you felt this is my ownership, and you went out and bought those records? Was it the Beatles or was it something earlier?
First album that I bought was the Beatles' second American release, called the Beatles' second album, I believe, something like that. And I played that constantly, you know. Part of what inspired me to buy the whole album was I was out with a youth group. I was in a youth group just to get out of my house. We were at a pizza parlor and they had a jukebox in the pizza parlor. And I hadn't really paid much attention to what was on the jukebox, but when Roll Over Beethoven came out of the jukebox, I suddenly was like, I never heard the bass drum before, you know, I didn't realize, because there was a 15-inch speaker in the jukebox, and suddenly I could hear the bass drum and hear how the bass and the bass drum locked with each other, and it was like a whole revelation, discovering the bottom end. And so that kind of, it was almost that alone, you know, that boom, 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 all through Roll Over Beethoven, that inspired me to get the record.
Rock Salad TV, 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 Rock Salad TV.